Welcome to rePROs Fight Back, a podcast where we explore all things reproductive health, rights, and justice. I'm your host, Jennie, and I'll be helping you stay informed around issues like birth control, abortion, sex education, and LGBTQ issues, and much, much more. Giving you the tools you need to take action and fight back. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, rePROs. How's everybody doing? I'm your host, Jennie, and my pronouns are she, her. So y'all, first, sorry for maybe some less than ideal audio for the intro. Don't worry, the rest of the episode should be good. I just had to run home to Wisconsin for a family emergency. And so I'm actually recording in my childhood bedroom right now. But that means I didn't have my microphone or all of my usual recording equipment with me. So we're getting maybe a little less than ideal for the intro. But the rest of the episode should be wonderful. And I am so excited for this bonus episode. It really is one of my favorite things we do because it is just so fun to hear people's stories and hear why they got into this field or how they got into this field. I feel like every year, even though I know a lot of these people pretty well, I feel like there's always at least one person's story who tells me something that I didn't know before. I'm always surprised by somebody, and that's a lot of fun. And then the other thing to me that is really important about this series is I feel like I get asked a lot, how do I end up doing what I do or get this job? Whenever we have interns, I feel like they're always really worried about making the perfect next step. And I remember that, right? I got to do just the right thing to get where I want to be. And I think these stories are a great illustration of we all came at this in many different ways and everybody's paths were different, and that there is no one way to get to work in this field. There's just the way you came to this field. And I think these stories do a really great job of illustrating that. So again, I just love this SRHR Hero Origin Story series. It is one of my favorites, and that's why we keep doing it. So I hope you will all enjoy a special bonus episode of it. Today, I do tell my story, but I stuck it at the end since y'all have heard me talk about my past several times and how I got here. So I figured I would stick that at the end. So if you didn't want to listen to it, you didn't have to. Sorry, y'all, if you can hear that. My parents' cat is running all over the place. So today we have Gayatri Patel with the Women's Refugee Commission is going to tell her story first. And then I have Tarah Demant with Amnesty International is going to tell her story. And then that leads into mine where we talk about how we have similar stories in some places. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this episode. Like I said, I had a great time talking to both Tarah and Gayatri, and I hope you enjoy our conversations. Hi, Gayatri. Thank you for being here today.
Hey, Jennie. It's great to be back and good to see you.
Always wonderful to see you. Before we get into your story, do you maybe want to introduce yourself and include your pronouns?
Sure. My name is Gayatri Patel. I am the Vice President of Advocacy and External Relations at the Women's Refugee Commission, and I go by the pronouns she, her.
So I love this series because, one, everybody's stories are totally different, and it's always so fun to hear how people came to this work. Do you want to tell us your story?
Yeah, and I got to say, I really love it too. There's so many different ways that people have engaged with SRHR issues or gotten motivated or what drives them. So it's been really interesting to hear what has brought people to this work. For me, I think a lot of it really kind of started off with my background and my deep personal interest in gender-based violence issues. And I've been working on those issues for quite a while in a number of different ways. Like I was a rape crisis counselor for a while. I was a prosecutor for domestic violence issues for a while. I've worked on gender-based violence in domestic settings and in humanitarian settings. So I've gotten kind of the global aspect of it. And it's really it's hit home for me the importance of bodily autonomy and just having control over your own body. And the reason I'm saying this is because I've had clients or interacted with people whose their choice to be able to leave an abusive relationship was stifled because they had children with their abusive partner and they didn't feel like they were able to leave. Or, some of them didn't even have control over using protection, using condoms, taking birth control pills, et cetera, in that abusive relationship or as a result of rape or sexual assault. And so it just really hit home to me through all of those experiences that, this fundamental question of like, if a woman can be raped, or if they can hit us, or if they can tell us to even like prevent a pregnancy or prevent an STI, do we even own our own bodies? And I guess that fundamental question has really kind of driven me in our advocacy, or in my advocacy around sexual and reproductive health and rights, because it's just so fundamentally important to recognize that we do own our bodies. We do own the choices that we make. And it shouldn't even be a debate, is my view.
Well, again, the learning things you didn't know in this episode. This is my favorite part, is learning parts of my friends' pasts I didn't know. I didn't know you were a prosecutor.
Yeah, I mean, it was a brief moment in time, but it was so enlightening because I was working on domestic violence in like a city. And some of the cases we would get were just horrifying. There were people who came in who had been beaten by the same person for years, but literally refused to even file a complaint against them because they had children with that person, or they were economically dependent on them. And so as a prosecutor, I was like, okay, but we have resources. We can help you. We can get you hooked up with a social service counselor to be able to get you financial assistance or help with getting custody of your children. But it was so internalized for a lot of them that they couldn't leave their abuser. And when it came down to just not even being able to demand that their abuser use a condom, or that they have any say over their own birth control choices, it was so, looking for the right word, I felt that they were so trapped in so many ways. And that is such a disempowering feeling. I felt that before. So I felt for them how trapped they must be feeling, to feel like they have to stay in that kind of relationship.
Yeah, this is one of those issues that hits very close to home. I talked about it on the podcast, being a victim of intimate partner violence, but I think one of the things that really, like from my experience and like thinking through all of this, is the lack of broader community understanding of like what is in that whole bubble, and like people only have like this really narrow view of like what domestic violence or intimate partner violence is. And so, and it's not through any fault of any person's, right? Like it's just broader education
Yeah.
in the community. And so it's hard to find help early because you might not know all of those early signs because they're not talked about as much.
Hmm.
I just thinking through like that whole big thing of all of the things that are captured when you're thinking about intimate partner violence before you get to the place where you're so trapped, it's impossible to make decisions. Yeah, I don't know, it's just
Yeah.
one of those things I think about.
Well, I mean, I also think about that. I think you're totally right. And I think about that in the context of the work that I do now. So, like I said earlier, I work for the Women's Refugee Commission, and we work in humanitarian contexts where we know that services and options for women and girls are limited. There's a disproportionate impact of a humanitarian crisis on women and girls, particularly for adolescent girls, for instance, who kind of get ignored when it comes to services for women and services for younger children. And so, and they deal with things like child marriage or human trafficking, female genital mutilation, like all of these issues impact them specifically. And when we're talking about these issues, it's a matter of, it really hits home that SRHR in emergencies is not just a nice to have, it's actually life saving in so many ways. And when you're looking at girls who are too young their bodies are too young to birth children, yet they're forced to birth children, or, some of them don't even know what their periods are, yet they're forced to marry. It just really makes clear how important comprehensive SRHR services are. Comprehensive sexuality education. I mean, that's one thing that is part of this whole concept of sexual and reproductive health and rights. Yet it's something that we're purposely keeping from girls who need it the most, and it's killing them. It's really killing them. And so, when I'm advocating on these issues, I really try to make those terms and the impact of it clear, that when we're not investing in adolescent girls, when we're not investing in sexual and reproductive health care, when we're quibbling about, legislative language that will impact the lives of millions of women and girls in humanitarian contexts, we really have to just humanize that and say this is killing people, to keep them from that access. I'm sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox right now because
No,
it's
and
I'm just
I was actually thinking, like, part of the things you were talking about was like kind of connecting those multiple points of like comprehensive sexuality education as like can play such an important role because it can do that healthy relationship education that can teach you
Mhm.
about like what abuse looks like from beginning to end. It can make sure you're aware of birth control and abortion and making sure you have that awareness so you can have that control over your body.
Exactly. And I mean, I think that's the point, right? Like, so much of the patriarchy feeds itself because we keep information from people, and information is power. So if we keep comprehensive sexuality education away from them, if we keep access to birth control or abortion or post-abortion care, any of that from people, you're disempowering them, and you're keeping that status quo of women and girls will stay in their place. They'll be wives, child bearers, etc., rather than living their dreams. And so it really just limits their options and really almost negates the fact that they have a human right to this, to sexual and reproductive health care. So it's something that's really critically important to me, and as a person, but also as an advocate, and as a person who works for the Women's Refugee Commission, very important to keep raising in the context of humanitarian settings.
Do you have anything you want to add or
Yeah, I think we've touched on it, but to me, when we're talking about SRHR, we're talking about the full range. We're not just talking about abortion. We're not just talking about birth control or family planning. We're talking about everything from the information you get to the agency that you get from having that information and being able to use it, all the way to the methods, to the access, to the quality, to the life-saving nature of it, to prioritizing it, to proactively making sure that it's available to people, and that people have a choice in using it for them, a personal choice in using it. That to me is what we should be talking about, that full range, and not just the availability of it, but the actual ability to get it in your hands. And so I think that's the only thing I would add, is personally really important to me, and kind of what drives me.
yeah, I think that gets lost in like access, right? Because we talk about access, but there's like multiple levels of like access to like being able to go to the store and get it, to like knowing it's available, to having the ability to choose to use it. Like
Hmm.
all of that gets kind of hidden in like the easy way we talk about it when we talk about the importance of access.
Yeah. And just the kind of the environment in which we live, where in some places taking birth control is stigmatizing, particularly for adolescent girls, so they don't do it. And the whole host of problems with early pregnancy, early childbirth, etc. And so looking at how we change the mindset and norms around SRHR.
Well, Gayatri, thank you for sharing your story. As always, it's a joy to talk to you.
It's so great to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to hearing this, but I'm also looking forward to you continuing to do this podcast. It's so fantastic, and kudos to you for just making it so accessible and so easy to engage.
Oh, thanks, Gayatri.
So my name is Tarah Demant. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the International Director of Programs, Government Relations, and Advocacy at Amnesty International USA, although those titles sort of change with some rapidity. Most important, I lead our work on women's rights, LGBTI rights, sexual and reproductive rights, and Indigenous people's rights. And, the question of like where that work started, particularly my interest and commitment in sexual and reproductive health and rights, and my really specifically commitment to abortion access. I've been thinking about this a lot because I don't really have a particularly interesting story or like really, compelling or narrative driven story. When I grew up in a really small town, and we've talked about this before, and of course, Jenny, you know this, but like I grew up in a really small town in rural California that people's like, ooh, California. And I'm like, I'm from the part of California you're not thinking, right? Which is the farm country. And it was a town of like 1,000 people, and my parents were the only Democrats in town. I mean, I secretly think there's another family, but they would never be out about it. Like this is the type, like just a really, really conservative town, and everything in the town rotated around the church. And it was either like, so my dad is a retired Lutheran minister, or the Presbyterian church, or the Lutheran church, or the Catholic church, or whatever, right? So like just a very religious space, and like very little separation of church and state, like at the school level. And so even though my parents were really liberal comparatively, like my town and my friends and the surroundings were really conservative. And this was the 80s, and like the culture wars were hot. And I mean, there was no internet, so that was great. But, there was still a lot of like talk radio and television sort of really building that, which now feels very common, narrative of like abortion is murder, and abortion is a sin, and abortion is wrong. And, when I was in high school, I was really active in like loads of things and loads of clubs and whatever else, but including in like our church youth group. And like at my church, it didn't come up. It wasn't really talked about in that way, but like I knew everyone around me didn't support abortion. Like I knew like my mom was pro-choice, but like the whole world was not, right? And I remember even as a kid, or as a high schooler, which is, still a kid, but being with friends, and like someone who's giving out those little feet pins. They're like this little gold pin that has two like little tiny like beba feet.
Yep, yep.
Only it's like the size of a dime, right? I remember putting it on and being like, well, yeah, like, you shouldn't murder a baby, right? Like this feels right. And it's just like this very unthoughtful way of thinking. At the same time, mind you, my high school had one of the highest pregnancy per capitas in all of California, because like we had no sex ed, and because there were no resources, because there's no birth control, and not everybody had healthcare, and all this kind of stuff. And like, but it was not a particularly thoughtful journey to being like someone who was wearing this like little pro-life pin, and then being like, wait, what? And I think it was, I do have a really early memory of going to Michael Dukakis. Shout out to Michael Dukakis, which many of your listeners may never have heard of. Michael Dukakis, who ran against, he was a Democratic nominee against George Bush, the first. And we went to a rally at the train station in Fresno, which is the nearest city to where my town is. And there were these people that held up these signs. They were the ones with like the weird dismembered fetus signs, where you're like,
Oh yeah.
where are you getting these things? Like, what is this? And now we're of course like, oh, these are doctored and whatever else. But I remember my mom, I was maybe like 10 I could probably actually do the math, but I was young. But I remember my mom like losing her shit. My mom's a really petite person. Like she's like 5 foot on a good day. And like I mean, she just lost her mind. And I remember then thinking, oh, like these people are not right. Like these people are wrong. But like then in high school, sort of thinking like, oh, I don't know, abortion doesn't seem right, right? But the more and more like I actually thought about the issue of abortion, I think also when I considered myself of reproductive age and became sexually active, that I thought, which was after high school, right? So I wasn't really thinking about this as a real issue. It was more like a theoretical issue. Theoretically, abortion seemed wrong, right? And then when I was sexually active, and when all the people I knew were sexually active and like talking about it, it was like, oh, like I should be able to control my own body and my own life. And it wasn't like this sort of vast realization that like abortion is or is not wrong, but that like I should be able to control my own body and my own life. And that like, and that for people who can get pregnant at like, and looking around me in my college, and again this is now in the early 90s, and looking at all the cis women I was friends with at the time, and thinking we should have the power over our own bodies. And like stripping people of power to access abortion or abortion rates, is fundamentally like tethering us to like a birthing path, and really like thinking about the way that like it very quickly moves from like abortion is wrong to like a dystopia in which we are people who can give birth are forced to give birth. And so I think like when it became personal is probably maybe when I actually was much more thoughtful about it. I remember my mom sort of being like, don't wear this pin, it's dumb, and being like, oh, okay. Because I wasn't really thinking much about it. But when it like became obvious what it would mean, even though in high school all these people around me were having children, whether or not they would have chosen to do that, sort of beside the point because they didn't have the choice. And so that like my origin story is not that interesting in the sense that like it just occurred to me one day like this is real bullshit. Like this is super super wrong to deny people the right to make the choice for themselves. And then like very very quickly also it was like very easy to reconcile with my own morality and with my religion. And I think that there are folks who maybe come from much more conservative religious backgrounds who that can be a real task for, right? I think that's something I don't know that we do very well in the movement, is to think about if you do have folks who come from a specific religious background that's very conservative on this issue, it's a much harder bar to pass. And mine, it wasn't particularly virulent about it. It wasn't particularly conservative about it. It wasn't like amazing about it, but and that's come a long way, the church body. But yeah, so that was, and then in college, it just became so obvious. It was like once I thought about it, I was like, this is so obvious to me. This is so, so obvious. And also, like, I just don't understand how everyone doesn't think this is this obvious, and how everyone doesn't make this their life work, right? In some way or another, whether or not you're doing it full time for pay, whether or not you're dedicated to it as a voter, whether or not you're there to support friends that need abortion care, whether or not you're there to have hard conversations with your auntie who thinks abortion is murder and no one should have to be able to, access it, whatever. And I think that like then that it very just quickly was like from 0 to 60 for me, where it was just like, oh, this is just obvious. And now like everybody needs to be talking about this and thinking about this. I think for me too, that this was, I really, again, my mom was really active in her own way in the women's liberation movement and was very liberal in a very conservative space. And I mean, like, liberal for being in a conservative space. And like for me, abortion very clearly was the central tenet. Like as I began to think about this, like abortion is the central tenet of women's liberation. And it is for anybody who can get pregnant. And that includes like trans men and queer bodied folks and non-binary folks. But as someone who at the time particularly was very focused on the question of women's equity and equality, like there is no version of gender equality without abortion. And that became sort of very central to me very quickly, where if you're dedicated to women's rights in any way, you have to be doing the work on abortion access, because there is no equality when the state controls your body. And that's true of a lot of issues and across sex and gender. But like for me, thinking as a cis woman, thinking about women's rights in that way, particularly in the 90s, it was a wild time, the 90s. Like there's just
Yeah.
no way to separate those two things out. And so that's the sort of like slow and fast evolution of how I got into this work. And then I went to graduate school, and I was a professor in gender and in English, and not in advocacy, directly. And it was the aughts and the Bush second. So there's this dynasty of Bushes, unfortunately, that had just been elected, is a strong word. Obviously, Bush was not elected the first time, but was appointed president. And that was a really devastating blow. I was an activist in college, and it was the very end of that time of working in terms of trying to, like, it just seemed to me so obvious that America would reject this choice. And then, of course, then he was appointed president.
I remember that.
Yeah, and then he was elected a second time, and that was like gutting for me. I just thought this is a different place, and of course, like we know it is not a different place. We know, in fact, it is a much worse place, and that particularly like the ability to believe that is like doused in white privilege. And for me at the time, it was a real wake up call about what our country is and always has been, and like what it can very quickly become in terms of like more and more like stripping of rights and access and those types of things. And so, if I don't know if anything like radicalized me, it might have been the appointment of President Bush, and just sort of seeing the way that how quickly these institutions I had just sort of assumed were in place could really fall apart really quickly, and like things I didn't believe in that no one should have to do, including to be forced to give birth, or including, of course, like torture and all the things that came out of that presidency, like that fell apart. And that to me, I think, was a time where I was like, oh, I need to do this full time. Like this is something I really want to be spending my time on. And so then slowly began to figure out how to transition out of an academic career that had a major gender component, but felt still very detached from the things I really wanted to be making impact on. So that's my origin story, my hero and or villain story, depending on how things go in any given day. And I think, I don't know, if anything, it's probably, I think some people have such really compelling, to me, really compelling and personalized stories about the impact of not having access to abortion. Like, as someone who's never needed an abortion, like I don't have that, but I have always known that if I needed an abortion, I could and would get one. And like, that's something that not everyone gets to say because of the luck of their position in this country or this world. And like, having that knowledge has been like at the center of me being able to make choices about my life and my destiny, is that I can always choose whether or not to have a child, to give birth. And that, like, I can't imagine making choices about your life or going anywhere, whether it's an advocacy or, you know, getting to DC or California or wherever it is you want to be, without being able to make that decision. So yeah, so then it was the sort of slow and fast move into advocacy that brought me here. And I'd been a volunteer, you know, I'd been working in advocacy campaigns and those types of things, but professionally, yeah, made that switch. And then it's just very hard to imagine not doing it at this point. And it can be a drag. I mean,
Yeah.
you know this, like, it's really exhausting. And sometimes you think, like, I don't know, do the folks in the environmental movement have it easier? Probably not, right? But like, you start to like imagine that another
Oh,
cause
yeah.
might be
I'm going to
easier.
open that bakery bookstore and just say,
100%.
screw
I'm
all
going to
this.
start the romance novel of my life up in Vermont, opening a bakery bookstore at Christmas. It'll be called Candy Cane Books. And like, but it like, then what, like, I'd just be like, oh, I really need to be doing this other work. So that's how it sort of, you know, started the gears going. But like, I'm continually challenged in such incredible ways by the youth, in terms, like, outside, I'm very middle aged at this point, but also like the folks who are doing such radical reproductive justice work are continually like the people that I look to and are like, yes, guy, you are the North Star. And can I ever inch myself closer? Can I ever hope to be doing the type of work that you're doing and pushing it forward in the way that you're doing? So that's the continuation. I think that's the future tense, right? Like, I don't know that there's a world in which I'm not policy and advocacy nerd. Like, it's pretty good with my skill set and I really enjoy it. But like, the folks who are doing like the really transformative reproductive justice work, which obviously includes abortion, but it's not exclusive to abortion, who are making the explicit ties with racial justice and decolonization, like, those are the people now that I think, oh, now you're my continued origin story, right? Like, you are continuing to move me to like be drawn to do this work, to see the transformative power of it, and to see it, how necessary it is across every spectrum of rights and questions. So yeah, TBD in 5 years what that, you know, what that looks like. My origin story is going to be like, actually, it's just this, these folks have been doing the work so well and for so long. So yeah.
I have to say, a lot of
Mm.
parallels. So, like, grew up small town, Wisconsin. I mean, my address was Beloit, which was bigger town. I think it was like 35 or 40,000 when I grew up. But
Oh yeah, my address was Fresno. That was a farce.
right. But I did not live there, right?
Yeah.
I went to a very small high school, but I went to Catholic school through K through 8 and went to Catholic church. But similar to you, the one I went to wasn't super active around abortion. Like, it wasn't something I remember hearing talked about, like, from the pulpit or anything like that. I mean, maybe it happened. I don't remember it. It did not have an impact on me, if it did. So yeah, I had sex ed, and yes, that is very heavily air quoted, because seriously, that was not at all what that was, from a nun.
Sorry.
So
Sure, it was extremely comprehensive.
yeah, no, so comprehensive. Very, I always refer to it as the mean girl sex ed, right? The, like, you're gonna have sex, you're gonna get this horrible disease, and you're gonna die.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's what we had in public school.
Super helpful in life.
Yeah.
And then similar to you, like, I had somebody I went to school with when I was in, I don't know, I want to say like 5th or 6th grade, invited me to go to Madison to, like, let's go save babies. My family and I are going to Madison to this clinic, and we're going to go save babies. You should come with. And being like, yeah, no, like,
I mean, the messaging
babies,
of the
like,
right is so good. Like, if only we were, you know,
right?
not as evil, but so good at messaging, because saving babies is really hard to argue against, right?
Exactly. So then I, like, go home and I'm like, Mom, can I go with so-and-so to go to Madison and save babies? And it was very much the like, okay, let's sit down. And like, I remember like sitting in our sunroom at like the breakfast counter and like having this conversation with her and her not telling me like, this is what you should think or any of those things, but very much just like, okay, but have you thought about someone who's in this situation or what about this or what about that or whatever. And then at the end just being like, okay, well, if you still want to go, you can go. And like, obviously by that point she had clearly made her case of like, oh no, this is terrible. Like, no, you should obviously be able to make these choices based on your situation and whatever. Obviously it wasn't like the full view I have now, right? But it was like, okay, like baby steps, right? And then went to the small, very rural high school where I don't remember issues like being talked about a ton, but it was much more conservative than I was even. But I just remember not being like an open, welcome place for people to be their authentic selves. And that had a huge impact on me. I don't know that I just wasn't exposed to a broad range of ideas, right? Like in many ways, shapes, and forms, right? Like it's a very small rural high school. So like there weren't a lot of like class options of like.
It wasn't the only thing you weren't learning, right? Like.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. No, I went to college and had no idea how to study because I had never had to do it before.
You know, I'm interested in like the ways that, especially like the parallels with our moms, probably who my mom was like, what the fuck? You know, that calls to me, I think, the necessity of us talking out loud about abortion. And, you know, I think I really admire and I think that's so impactful when people share their abortion stories. It's always like so shitty that someone shouldn't have to share a healthcare story to like make people care.
Yeah.
But like that, you know, the question of like shouting your abortion is partly because it humanizes this issue. And I think whether or not someone has had an abortion, like we all need to be talking about this, like the normal issue it is, and not, you know, because like, you know, our moms are like, wait, what? Because like we've never had a conversation about abortion.
Oh yeah, I remember like it's in high school the like whisper like, oh, so and so she's had no abortion.
Yeah.
Like whether true or not. Like I don't even know that those were true, right? But
highly
like it was the very
resources, but no, and I know,
in like rural area.
I remember a girl that got pregnant in my high school and like didn't know and didn't want to have a baby and like literally had no idea what to do. And like those are the cases where in those stories, and I think we all know some version of the story or the whispers around high schools particularly, or maybe even colleges, but like or college age or high school age folks, but like just that like this has to be a kitchen table conversation whether or not you know someone who needs an abortion, who's needed an abortion. But of course like you do, right? Because like the odds are, unless you know no one, like you know and love people who have had abortions. And I think about this with my grandmother too, on my mom's side, who grew up again in California, but in extremely rural Northern California, like mountain past kind of folks, and like no electricity till the 70s, no outdoor plumbing, like that kind of thing. And like they grew up during the depression and after, and like my grandma is really liberal on these issues and a lot of issues. And it like because fundamentally like she knew people and like no one talked about it and all those sort of classic stories, right? But still no one talked about it. And I think about even if like this assumption that it sounded like both our mothers had that like, yeah, doy, like you would support basic human rights. It didn't even occur to me to talk about this. I think one of the things as a movement is like we have got to talk about this. Like I've got to be talking about this with my brother and his kids, and I've got to be talking about this at the kitchen table. Like we as Demants talk about a lot of things at the kitchen table, and that so but like at the kitchen tables of friendship and whatever else, like normalizing talking about abortion, you know, has got to be part of that call. Because otherwise someone's hero story is going to be a villain story where it's like I didn't think about it and then I was really compelled by this messaging, or my religion told me this was bad and I'm compelled by that, as opposed to like having the conversations with folks that are asking us to be more thoughtful, asking us to think about like what it really means to make that choice for someone else, make that decision for someone else, and basically like force someone to give birth, right? Yeah, I know we've talked about before how our stories, our sort of upbringings are fairly similar. And And now it just seems so obvious, but I think like I feel like it could have gone a lot of ways for me, right? It could have
Yeah,
gone
for
a totally
sure.
different way. And like that's just sad for me more than the movement, right? That's like a really shitty place to be, on the wrong side of justice, and like forcing people to carry pregnancies. Like I just imagine being that person and think, wow, I'm really glad that that's not where I am. I do wonder sometimes where like, you know, in 20 years we'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought XYZ, because we're continually
Yeah.
growing and thinking as activists. And yeah.
It's funny because I think back to that conversation with my mom for a number of reasons. And it came back up in college when I met some friends who were like, lived in my hall, and we ended up becoming roommates later. And they were like a really conservative religion. And like, I had not appreciated the tenets that that conversation brought up of like, learn more about, question things, figure out your own
Mm,
thoughts. Don't just take what I'm
hmm.
saying, but like figure out your views on this, until I met some people who very much were not raised that way,
Mm-hmm.
where it was like, no, this is what it is, full stop. Like being gay is bad
Right.
and abortion is murder and like hard line. And I'm like, wait, what are you talking? Like,
Yeah.
have you not thought about this? And so like, even beyond the abortion part of that conversation, like having the ability to make my own choices
Uh-huh.
was like really great.
Well, and
I
deeply
think the
related,
one
right?
other,
Like deeply
yeah,
related.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
The other funny part of my story is that that inciting incident, that person came up again later. She connected with me on Facebook, like
yeah.
early days when I got on, and I had just started working at the Population Institute, and we were like just developing our page, and I was trying to grow it, and I knew I had people that I went to Catholic school with, so like I didn't go like the abortion angle, or I didn't even talk about family planning. Maybe it did, but I was talking about maternal health
Mm-hmm.
and like the importance. This is when like a woman was dying every minute,
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah,
which again shows how far we've come, because it's not that, it's still bad, but
yeah,
it's not
yeah.
that bad anymore. And she responded about like, well, a woman's greatest pleasure should be to die bringing life into the
Whoa,
world.
shit.
And I
That's
was just like,
hardcore.
whoa, what? No, how did this
I
happen?
mean, like, who
Like,
is radicalizing these people? Yeah, I mean that's a really weird, to me, really bizarre. Boy, that's a cult. You know, I don't even know what to do with that except for just say like,
I
wow,
was like,
what are
I
the
can't
implications
respond
of
to that.
forcing that on someone else, right? Like
Yeah.
that. But I do think we're at cross purposes on a lot of those conversations with, and it's not a conversation because like if someone is, you know, someone would say is like, well, it's not a personal thing because we make morality our laws all the time. Like you can't murder, for example, which is morality, right? Like murder is bad, therefore no one should
Mm-hmm.
murder. And like, so if someone like just believes that like literally your destiny, your greatest martyrdom is to like die giving birth, then we got nowhere to go with that person right now. I don't know that, I don't want to say never, but like that's not a conversation to like, that's not a place I think is worth our time right now. Or if someone else has the answer, I'd be really interested. But I think right now, like, look, abortion is popular. Abortion polls, abortion votes. Like, abortion is a gerrymandering issue in the United States. It doesn't mean that there aren't people who, like, in their hearty hearts believe that abortion is wrong. Clearly, we know these people. Everyone knows these people. Everyone's got an aunt or a sister, you know, maybe themselves. But it means that, like, more people believe that everybody should be able to decide for themselves what is right for them, right? And like more and more people believe that like abortion is not murder and that actually it is healthcare. And so like those are the conversations I think we need to build on and grow. But yeah, because I don't know how you even start that. I don't know how you have a conversation.
Yeah, I didn't respond to that. I had some friends who did, and they did it in a gentle way of like,
Which is probably more effective than
just
me
like,
being like,
right, like
no.
in a lot of places, like people that don't have this choice, and like
Yeah.
I was obviously rapidly unfriended.
I know.
I don't know why.
Yeah, crazy. I'm not super active on social, but RIP Twitter. And but like I'm on Facebook and partly like because I actually don't like I stay in touch with the people I want to stay in touch with, and I don't, yeah. But I don't know that that helps, right? Because like then conservative people I went to school with never see another opinion.
No, right. Yeah, it was one of those things of like my path wasn't straight, went kind of all
Mm-hmm.
over the place, and mine actually came through environment. Like that's where I
Mm-hmm.
connected in college, and then it became environment and development,
Mm-hmm.
and then looking for a job after grad school and didn't find what I thought I was looking for.
Found
and
what was
stumbled
looking for
into
you.
where I'm at, right? And found like, oh wait, this is where my passion is, because of all of the things that had happened in my history, right? Like not having good sex education and the implications of what it meant later in life, and being a survivor of intimate partner violence, and like all of the threads came together in this one place. And like now I couldn't imagine working in another field.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think, if anything, I'm glad to have a boring story, just because I think sometimes there's this like premium put on like needing to be the perfect activist and the perfect advocate. And like, I don't actually, like, it doesn't matter how you got here, right? Like, come do the work, be a part of it, and be a part of it where you are. And I think that's also something I need to work on personally, is like,
and keep learning, right? Like you
meet
talked
people where
about,
they
like,
are and keep learning together,
yes.
right? So yeah. No, I'm excited to hear mostly the other folks on the episode, because I'm really excited to hear how other people
I
get
love
into this
these.
work, and also like what this work means, right? Because we're really privileged to be able to get paid to do what we really believe in, and that is privilege. I mean, it's still capitalism. I want to be really clear that a job is a job, and it sucks a lot, but also like it's privileged to get paid to do work you really care about. And I'm really interested to the folks, I just don't have the drive that the folks who do a full-time job, or for pay, and then their second shift basically is doing this work. And those are folks that I find myself really inspired by, because I'm like, I can't imagine doing other things, and so this is a very good fit for me. And at the end of the day, though, I'm exhausted, and I go home and I garden and whatever else, or now it's cold, but I read a lot of books and try and do other things I care about. But like, for folks who show up after having done something else that they need to do to survive in this capitalistic world, like, those are the stories I want to hear. Like, what motivates those folks? Because I sometimes need that too, because I've got to pull in my own second shift, and sometimes I'm like, ugh, how can I make this work? And I need that motivation. So yeah, really excited. Always a pleasure to talk with you. But being on the podcast,
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks for putting all our stories together, right? These are the things that bind us together and keep us going when the times get hard, and they are. So we'll keep going together.
Okay, y'all. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Like I said, the origin story ones are just among my absolute favorites. So I hope you all enjoyed that. And I will see you all next week with our regularly scheduled episode. Thanks. For more information, including show notes from this episode and previous episodes, please visit us at our website at reprosfightback.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at rePROs Fight Back, and on Instagram at rePROsFB. If you like our show, please help others find it by sharing it with your friends, and please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.